In January 2004, a casino that had ruled downtown Las Vegas for 52 years changed hands in a transaction that took less than 24 hours. The Horseshoe had survived mob wars, federal investigations, and the corporate takeover of the Strip. But it could not survive the people who inherited it. This is the story of how 5 children turned a $100 million empire into a cautionary tale about what happens when legacy becomes a curse instead of a gift. The outlaw who built an empire. Benny Binion came to Las Vegas in 1946 because Texas had gotten too hot. He had run the numbers racket in Dallas for years, controlled the bootlegging, handled the policy games that cops and politicians pretended not to see. But control only lasts as long as the bribes do, and by 1946, Benny had killed 2 men, narrowly avoided a murder conviction, and heard enough whispers about federal investigations to know it was time to move. Vegas in 1946 was barely a city. About 20,000 people, a handful of casinos on Fremont Street downtown. The Strip did not exist yet. Bugsy Siegel was building the Flamingo in the desert, and most people thought he was crazy. Benny looked at downtown and saw something different. He saw a place where a man with cash and nerve could build something legitimate out of skills learned in the criminal underworld. He bought the Horseshoe Casino in 1951 with money he had made running illegal gambling operations. 5 stories, horseshoe-shaped bar, location right on Fremont Street where the action was. But Benny did not want to run just another casino. He wanted to build something that would outlast the mob joints that were starting to pop up down the road. So he implemented a policy that sounded insane to every other casino owner in Nevada. No limits. If you had the money to bet, the Horseshoe would take your action. Other casinos capped their bets. $500 on craps, $1,000 on blackjack. They did this for a reason. One lucky player on a hot streak could wipe out a casino's bankroll if the house did not limit exposure. But Benny understood something about gambling psychology that the corporate types who ran the Strip casinos never grasped. High rollers did not want to play where they had to ask permission to make a bet. They wanted to walk up to a table and put down whatever they felt like risking. The Horseshoe gave them that freedom, and that freedom made them loyal. Benny backed up his policy with publicity stunts that became Vegas legend. He put $1 million in cash on display in a horseshoe-shaped case in the lobby. He let tourists take pictures standing next to it. That $1 million cost him nothing in interest, but it told every gambler who walked through the doors that Benny Binion had the bankroll to cover their action. When a player won big, Benny paid in cash immediately, with photographers watching. When they lost, Benny bought them dinner and a room and made sure they felt like kings even in defeat. The Horseshoe printed money. $5 million a year by the early 1960s. $10 million by the 1970s. Benny took those profits and invested them in land, in other businesses, in a ranch in Montana where he spent more and more time as he got older. But he never stopped being Benny Binion from Dallas. The man who had killed 2 rivals. The man who had run numbers and bootleg whiskey. The man who understood that Vegas was just another racket, only this one was legal. He had 5 children. Jack, the oldest, quiet and methodical. Ted, charming but troubled. Brenda, smart but pushed to the margins because she was a woman. Becky, who craved her father's approval but never quite got it. Barbara, the youngest, who mostly stayed out of the business. Benny loved his kids, but he did not prepare them to run anything. He taught them to be tough, to never back down, to handle problems the way he had handled them in Dallas. Those lessons worked fine when Benny was alive, and everyone understood he was the final authority. After he died, those same lessons turned his children into enemies. The inheritance. Nobody wanted. This section pivots toward familial discord within a casino dynasty narrative. It moves into Chapter 2, about the inheritance and the early dysfunction among the heirs. Benny Binion died on Christmas Day, 1989, of heart failure at age 85. He had beaten 2 murder raps, survived federal prison, outlived most of his enemies, and built an empire that dominated downtown Las Vegas. His will divided the Horseshoe equally between his 5 children, 20% each. That left no clear chain of command. 5 siblings who had grown up in their father's shadow now had to figure out how to run a business none of them fully understood. Jack Binion took charge first. He was the oldest and he had worked at the Horseshoe since he was a teenager. Quiet and careful, he was the opposite of his father's cowboy style. Jack understood something important. The Horseshoe's no-limit policy made it legendary, but that policy also meant the casino needed massive cash reserves to cover potential losses. If 4 high rollers hit hot streaks on the same night, the Horseshoe needed to be able to pay them all. That meant keeping millions in liquid assets instead of investing in expansions or renovations. Meanwhile, the Strip casinos were building mega resorts. The Mirage opened in 1989 with dolphins, white tigers, and a fake volcano. The Horseshoe looked exactly like it had in 1951. Worn carpet, dark wood, cigarette smoke hanging in the air like fog. Jack wanted to modernize. His siblings wanted their inheritance divided up immediately. Neither side was wrong. They just could not agree on anything. Ted Binion was the problem everyone saw coming, but nobody stopped. Handsome, charismatic, beloved by old-time gamblers who remembered Benny. But Ted had been using drugs since high school. Cocaine at first, then heroin, then everything. He would get clean for months, work the floor like the golden boy heir everyone wanted him to be, then disappear on a bender that lasted weeks. Benny had covered for him, paid for rehab, made excuses. After Benny died, Jack tried to do the same thing. But Ted's addiction was getting worse, and the Nevada Gaming Control Board was starting to ask questions. Becky and Brenda wanted Ted removed from casino operations. Jack resisted. This was his brother, his father's favorite son, the one who had Benny's charm and nerve. Pushing Ted out felt like admitting failure. Admitting that Benny's children could not hold together what Benny had built. But by 1998, Ted was using heroin daily, coming to work high, making decisions that put the casino's gaming license at risk. Jack finally agreed. Ted was forced to step down from all casino management positions. He kept his 20% ownership, but he could not work at the Horseshoe anymore. Ted took that betrayal hard. Not because he wanted to run the casino, but because being a Binion meant something in Vegas. It meant respect, fear, a kind of outlaw royalty that dated back to when his father first rolled into town. Without the Horseshoe, Ted was just another addict with money. He bought a house on Palomino Lane, started hoarding silver bars in a vault he had constructed underground, told people he was preparing for economic collapse, told other people he was worried his siblings would try to take his inheritance. What he was really doing was spiraling. The Horseshoe kept running, but the fights between siblings escalated. Jack wanted to expand, to build a hotel tower, to compete with the Strip. Brenda and Becky wanted to sell the whole operation while it still had value. Nobody trusted anyone else with money. Nobody could agree on basic business decisions. Board meetings turned into screaming matches. Lawyers got involved. The casino that Benny built on handshake deals and cowboy ethics was now being run by committees of attorneys arguing about fiduciary duty and shareholder rights. And through it all, Ted was sitting in his house on Palomino Lane, watching his silver hoard grow, using more heroin than his body could handle, and dating a woman named Sandra Murphy, who would eventually be accused of killing him. Ted's spiral. September 17, 1998. Ted Binion was found dead in his home on Palomino Lane, face down on a mattress, heroin and Xanax in his system. No signs of struggle. The initial ruling was overdose, accidental death. Just another addict who finally took too much. But within weeks, that ruling changed to homicide, and Sandra Murphy, Ted's girlfriend, was arrested along with her boyfriend, Rick Tabish, for murder. The prosecution's theory was simple. Sandra and Rick wanted Ted's money. His silver hoard, worth millions, was buried in a vault in Pahrump, about 60 miles from Vegas. Ted had hired Rick, a contractor, to build that vault. Rick knew exactly where it was and how to access it. Sandra had been living with Ted, watching him deteriorate, waiting for him to die, or helping him along if necessary. The day after Ted died, Rick drove to Pahrump with a crew and started digging up the silver. Someone called the cops. Rick was arrested with trucks full of silver bars that belonged to a dead man. The murder trial became a spectacle. Every detail of Ted's final years played out in court. The heroin addiction, the paranoia, the bizarre relationship with Sandra, who was decades younger and clearly interested in his money more than his company. But what emerged from that trial was not just the story of Ted's death. It was the story of how wealth and addiction and family dysfunction had created a situation where murder seemed almost inevitable. Ted had millions of dollars and no purpose. He had been pushed out of the family business, the one thing that connected him to his father's legacy. He had tried ranching in Montana, tried investing in other ventures. None of it stuck. So he used heroin and collected silver and told anyone who would listen that his siblings were trying to cheat him out of his inheritance. Some of that was paranoia. Some of it was true. Jack and the others were fighting in court over how to divide casino profits, whether to sell, who had authority to make decisions. Ted was named in multiple lawsuits filed by his own family. The silver hoard became Ted's obsession. He would visit the vault in Pahrump, run his hands over the bars, talk about how silver was real wealth, not like casino chips or stock certificates. He told friends he was worried someone would steal it. He told others he was worried the government would confiscate it. What he never said, but what everyone understood, was that the silver was the only thing Ted could control. His addiction controlled him. His family had pushed him out. His health was failing. But the silver was his, and nobody could take it away as long as he was alive. Sandra Murphy claimed Ted was suicidal, that he had talked about killing himself for months, that he had mixed heroin and Xanax deliberately, knowing it would stop his heart. The prosecution claimed Sandra had forced the drugs into him, held him down while he suffocated on the mattress. Rick Tabish claimed he was just following Ted's instructions, that Ted had told him to retrieve the silver after his death and distribute it according to his wishes. The jury did not believe any of them. Sandra and Rick were convicted of murder in 2000. They would serve 6 years before that conviction was overturned on appeal, and they were acquitted in a retrial. But the damage was done. Ted's death became the public face of the Binion family collapse. Newspapers ran stories about the curse of gambling wealth, about children who inherited fortunes they never earned and did not know how to handle, about addiction and greed and family betrayal. The Horseshoe's reputation, built on Benny's outlaw credibility and no-limit policy, was now associated with murder and dysfunction. High rollers started playing elsewhere, and corporate raiders started circling, sensing weakness. Jack tried to hold things together. He still believed the casino could survive this, and he still believed his father's legacy meant something. But Ted's death had exposed something that could not be hidden anymore. The Binion children were not capable of running their father's empire. They were too damaged, too distrustful, and too busy fighting each other to see that the Horseshoe was bleeding money and reputation, and the worst was yet to come. A family eating itself. Now we move into Chapter 4, focusing on Becky Banon's gambling addiction, her embezzlement, and the lawsuits between siblings. Becky Banon had always been the responsible one. While Ted was using drugs and Jack was fighting to keep the casino afloat, Becky worked behind the scenes, handling administrative duties and managing accounts. She was a Binion, but she had never sought the spotlight. She never demanded attention the way her brothers did. She just did her job, collected her share of the profits, and stayed out of the family drama that was tearing the Horseshoe apart, until someone noticed that millions of dollars were missing. The discovery came during a routine audit in 2003. Casino accountants found irregularities in the Horseshoe's financial records. Money that should have been in operating accounts was gone. Payments to vendors that did not exist. Transfers that made no sense. When investigators dug deeper, they found that Becky had been systematically stealing from the casino for years. Not small amounts. Millions of dollars. She had been using that money to feed a gambling addiction that had consumed her life. The irony was brutal. Becky worked at a casino her family owned. She had access to more money than most people would see in 10 lifetimes. But she could not stop gambling. She could not stop chasing losses. She could not stop feeding quarters into slot machines and pulling handles, hoping the next spin would be the one that finally brought her even. She gambled at the Horseshoe. She gambled at other casinos. She gambled everywhere, all the time, using stolen money because her own inheritance was not enough to cover her losses. Jack confronted her first in a private conversation. Family handling family business. Becky admitted everything. She said she had a problem. She said she would pay it back. She said she would get help. Jack wanted to believe her and wanted to handle this quietly the way Benny would have, keep it in the family. But the Nevada Gaming Control Board had already been notified. Casinos have to report financial irregularities. The board opened an investigation, and once that happened, there was no keeping it quiet. The scandal hit the newspapers in January 2004. Becky Binion, daughter of Benny Binion, had embezzled an estimated $4.5 million from the family casino to support her gambling habit. She was charged with theft, filing false tax returns, and failure to report cash transactions. She pled guilty eventually, agreed to pay restitution, and served probation. But the damage to the Horseshoe was catastrophic. The Nevada Gaming Control Board suspended the casino's license on January 9, 2004. Not permanently, not yet, but the message was clear. The Binions couldn't be trusted to run their own casino. They couldn't manage their own finances. They couldn't keep their own family members from stealing. Benny Binion had built the Horseshoe on his word and his reputation. His children had destroyed that reputation in 15 years. Jack, Brenda, and Barbara tried to salvage what they could. They proposed bringing in outside management. They offered to buy out Becky's share. They argued that one person's addiction should not destroy the entire business. But the board was not interested in compromise. The Binion family had proven they were incapable of operating a major casino. The only question was, what would happen to the Horseshoe now that the people who owned it had lost the right to run it? Meanwhile, lawsuits between family members escalated. Jack sued Becky over the embezzlement. Becky sued Jack over casino management decisions. Brenda sued everyone over profit distributions. The lawyers were making more money than anyone else in the family at this point. Every disagreement, every dispute, every argument about who deserved what percentage of the dwindling profits ended up in court. The family that Benny had built his empire to support was now tearing itself apart over the scraps. The Horseshoe lost its gaming license on March 10, 2004. Temporary suspension became permanent revocation. The casino that had never closed, the place where Benny Binion had taken on all comers without limits, shut its doors for the first time in 58 years. Dealers packed up chips. Security escorted the last few gamblers out. The $1 million Horseshoe display in the lobby was dismantled and sold. And the Binion children, who had inherited one of Vegas's most legendary properties, had nothing left to fight over. The empire crumbles. Heirs Entertainment had been watching the Binion situation for months before they made their move. Every lawsuit between siblings, every scandal that hit the newspapers, every Nevada Gaming Control Board hearing that exposed another layer of family dysfunction. They watched the way vultures watch something dying in the desert, patient and calculating, waiting for the exact moment when desperation would drive the price down to nothing. That moment came on March 10, 2004, when the Gaming Control Board license revocation became final. The Horseshoe was dead. Not metaphorically. Legally dead. A casino without a gaming license is just an empty building with worn carpet and the smell of cigarette smoke baked into the walls. The Binion family owned a corpse, and Heirs offered to buy it for approximately $50 million. Jack Binion tried to negotiate. He tried to argue that the Horseshoe brand alone was worth more than $50 million. He tried to explain that his father had built something irreplaceable, that the no-limit policy and the outlaw reputation and the history meant something. The Heirs executives listened politely and did not budge on price. They knew what Jack would not admit. The Horseshoe without the Binions running it was just another downtown casino in a city that had moved on to the Strip. The brand had value, but not to the people who had destroyed it. Only to a corporation that could strip away the dysfunction and package the history for tourists who did not know any better. The sale closed in less than 24 hours. No due diligence period. No contingencies. Heirs knew exactly what they were buying because they had been studying the property for months. The Binions knew they had no leverage, sign the papers, or watch the casino rot while they fought among themselves over who was responsible for the collapse. $50 million split 5 ways, $10 million per heir before legal fees and debts. Jack's share disappeared almost immediately into legal bills and settlements from the lawsuits his siblings had filed against him. Years of court battles over management decisions, profit distributions, and who had authority to do what. All of it had to be paid now. Brenda and Barbara took their money and walked away clean. They had never wanted to run the casino. They had never wanted the responsibility. For them, the sale was liberation from a family obligation that had become toxic. They could finally stop pretending to be Binions and just be people with money who happened to share a famous last name. Becky's share went directly to restitution payments for the money she had embezzled. $4.5 million she had stolen and gambled away. The courts took her inheritance and distributed it to the creditors and the government and everyone she had wronged while feeding quarters into slot machines. She ended up with almost nothing. A Binion daughter who had grown up with every advantage, who had inherited a fortune, walked away from the sale of her father's empire with barely enough to cover her legal fees. The addiction that had driven her to steal had also stolen her future. Ted's share went to his estate, which was still tied up in litigation from his death 6 years earlier. Sandra Murphy and Rick Tabish had been convicted, then acquitted on retrial. But the civil suits continued. Family members fighting over Ted's silver hoard, creditors claiming he owed them money, lawyers billing by the hour while they argued over assets that were disappearing faster than anyone could count them. Ted had died with millions. His estate would take years to settle and would make lawyers rich while his heirs got scraps. Heirs reopened the Horseshoe on April 7, 2004, less than a month after they bought it. They kept the name because it had brand recognition, Binion's Horseshoe. Tourists from the Midwest knew that name. They associated it with Old Vegas, real gambling, the kind of place where you could win big or lose everything on a single roll. Heirs understood marketing. They understood that people did not come to Las Vegas for corporate efficiency. They came for the illusion of danger and possibility. The Horseshoe name sold that illusion, even if the reality was gone. But everything else changed. The no-limit policy ended immediately. Heirs installed betting caps on every table, $5,000 on craps, and $10,000 on blackjack. The policy that had made the Horseshoe legendary, the policy Benny Binion had implemented because he understood that high rollers wanted freedom more than they wanted safety, was gone. It was replaced by corporate risk management, actuarial tables, and the kind of careful gambling strategy that would have made Benny laugh. The $1 million Horseshoe display in the lobby disappeared within weeks. That display had been pure Benny Binion, $1 million in cash mounted on the wall for tourists to photograph. It said something about the kind of casino the Horseshoe was. It said, "We have so much money that we can afford to put 1 million of it on display just to prove a point." Heirs did not need to prove anything. They moved the money to a vault and replaced it with a replica made of prop bills. Tourists still took pictures. They could not tell the difference. The World Series of Poker moved to the Strip in 2005. Heirs owned the rights to the tournament, having bought them from the Binions as part of the sale. But they moved the event to the Rio, one of their properties on Flamingo Road. The tournament that Benny had created in 1970 to showcase no-limit poker, the tournament that had turned the Horseshoe into the center of the poker world, was now just another corporate-sponsored event held in a convention center ballroom. The connection to the Binion legacy was severed. The history was rewritten to make it seem like the World Series of Poker had always been about the game rather than the family that invented it. Jack Binion watched all of this happen and understood that his father's empire was being erased, not destroyed, erased. Heirs was keeping the profitable parts and discarding everything that made the Horseshoe unique. The no-limit policy that attracted high rollers but created risk, gone. The $1 million display that cost nothing but created mystique, gone. The World Series of Poker that brought prestige but required investment, moved somewhere more profitable. What remained was a casino with a famous name and none of the substance that had made that name mean something. He tried to rebuild in Tunica, Mississippi. He opened Horseshoe Casino Tunica in partnership with Heirs in 2004. He tried to bring back the no-limit policy, the old-school gambling atmosphere, the Binion approach to customer service. But Mississippi wasn't Nevada. The gamblers were different. The competition was different. The whole ecosystem was different. You could not recreate what Benny had built, because what Benny had built only worked in a specific time and place. It was Vegas, in the 50s and 60s when downtown was the action, and a man with cash and nerve could make his own rules. That Vegas was gone. Jack was trying to resurrect something that had been dead for decades, and the sale of the original Horseshoe just made that death official. By 2005, you could walk through Binion's Horseshoe and see nothing that connected it to Benny Binion except the name on the sign. The dealers were new, the pit bosses were corporate employees with management degrees. The carpet had been replaced. The lighting had been updated. The whole place had been sanitized and modernized, turned into something that could have been any casino in any city. Heirs had bought a piece of Vegas history and gutted it for parts, keeping only what was profitable and discarding everything that made it legendary. The Binion children had enabled this, not just by selling, but by destroying the casino's reputation so thoroughly that selling was the only option left. They turned their inheritance into a liability. They turned their father's legacy into a cautionary tale, and a name that once meant something in Vegas into a reminder that winning never lasts forever, especially when the winners do not understand what they won. The empire did not crumble in one dramatic collapse. It crumbled slowly, piece by piece, sale by sale, scandal by scandal, until nothing remained except a name on a building and fading memories of what used to be. Benny Binion had built something that should have lasted generations. His children destroyed it in 15 years, and the city that had made the Binion family rich barely noticed when they disappeared. What Vegas forgot was how quickly a place can lose its soul. Downtown Vegas rebuilt itself after the Horseshoe closed. Fremont Street became the Fremont Street Experience. An LED canopy covered 5 blocks. Street performers and outdoor concerts appeared. Corporate casinos with familiar names and sterile interiors moved in. The tourists come. They gamble. They take pictures. And then they move on to the Strip. Nobody talks about the Binions anymore. The story is too sad, too complicated, too much of a reminder that in Vegas, winning never lasts forever. Benny Binion understood that. He had spent a lifetime gambling, and he knew the house always wins eventually. He just thought his house was strong enough to survive his death. He was wrong. The lesson buried in the Horseshoe's collapse is not about gambling. It is about legacy. It is about what happens when children inherit wealth and status they did not earn and do not know how to maintain. It is about how family bonds break under the weight of money and expectations, and under the impossible standards set by a father who built an empire from nothing. Binion left his children everything, and they turned it into nothing. That is the real tragedy. Not that an empire fell, but that it fell so quickly and so completely that most people in Vegas today do not even remember it existed.